in team. Morning, boys. Morning, Drew. Oh. It's all working today?
Yeah. I nearly put my pink jacket on.
Yeah.
Actually.
Audio level 1, 2, 3, David Crisafulli, joined by Ros Bates, Deb Frecklington, testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, in recent times we've revealed that Queensland's ambulance ramping has hit 42% in December. Last week we used the floor of Parliament to show how bad things are in the ED. Queenslanders waiting 12 hours in the waiting room and up to 24 hours to be able to get a bed. And today we know why. In the middle of the Queensland health crisis, the government has reduced beds at 29 hospitals, 335 beds, in fact, in the middle of a health crisis. And we've repeatedly asked the Minister as to why and what they plan to do to address it, and yet the government seems clueless about the pressure that our frontline staff are under. Now, make no mistake, when ambulances are ramped and they're not getting to you in your hour of need, there is a reason why, and that is there simply is not available beds at that hospital. And to know that at the PA there are 85 less beds between September 2021 and December 2022 in the middle of a health crisis shows you how dire things are. Across the Gold Coast, 76 fewer beds in that period. And now, most damaging, whistleblowers tell us in the first 3 months of this year things have deteriorated further. So today we ask the Minister to simply tell us what is that figure. How many available beds are there in Queensland right now for patients to be able to use? We don't want to have the excuses about data being a point in time. Give us the figure at the point in time that is the end of the March quarter, because Queenslanders are losing faith in the Minister and they're losing faith in the government to heal the Queensland health crisis. This is serious. We heard a lot in the lead up to the federal election about a change in government in Canberra delivering more funding and more beds. The Queenslanders aren't living that. They're living a health crisis the likes of which they have never seen before, and to know that there are 335 fewer beds across 29 hospitals must sound alarm bells, and it requires urgent action. And we will continue to put forward our solutions. And one of them is better resources. And we do want to have more beds. And we want to have some truth around what those beds look like and the support for our staff. And it's also about better triaging, sharing data in real time, and putting those overworked doctors and nurses back in charge. Hello, Ross.
Ros Bates, Shadow Minister for Health and Ambulance Services and registered nurse. Well, last week we asked the embattled Health Minister in question time, not once, but twice, about how many beds were available for Queenslanders. Was it more or less? Well, today we find out that 29 hospitals have less beds than what they had previously. Those beds are important because ambulance ramping occurs when there are no beds. My hard-working colleagues on the front line, the nurses, the doctors and paramedics, didn't sign up for this. They want to know that they've got a bed to put their patients in. Today we hear the Minister saying, or her department saying, well, it was because staff were on furlough. Well, is there more or less beds? Are there hospitals that have less beds? We now know that. And is it because of a staffing issue? Because this is the same government who trumpets how many staff that they have put on. So is it less beds because there are no staff? What is the actual truth? Yvette D'Arth is a fraud, a phony and a failure, and if Anastasia Palaszczuk wasn't the weakest Premier in Queensland's history, she would have sacked her incompetent, embattled Health Minister long ago. And where is the 50-50 funding that this government keeps talking about? We haven't heard a word since the change of government in Canberra. This is a government that has had 8 years and put Queensland Health in crisis and on red alert while the Premier's on the red carpet, and now they want to ask Queenslanders for another 8 years before most of these beds even come online. I'll let Deb say a few words.
Thank you. Well, of course, regional Queensland is always left behind by the Palaszczuk Labor government. And who but a Labor government would build a brand new regional hospital just like the Kingaroy Hospital with less beds than the old hospital. What we've seen in Kingaroy is 40% less beds. Now, yes, we have a hospital that was built over budget, of course, by the Labor government. They've put less beds in that hospital. They've put less nurses in that hospital. They've put less emergency doctors in that hospital. And we have less services. Only a Labor government would provide regional Queensland with less services, less nurses, less maternity. And if I take Kingaroy as a point, we've got 40% less beds than the old hospital. We've got no chemo care, we've got no mental health beds, and this is not good enough for a thriving centre such as Kingaroy. Now, the Palaszczuk government likes to trumpet that they build these infrastructure projects. Well, I can tell the Premier this is a massive fail. We've got a hospital that was $30 million over budget with 40% less beds. Only a Labor government could be this useless when it comes to the health department.
Thank you very much. Over to you. That's a question the government has to answer, and the second question is, has it deteriorated further in the first quarter of this year? Because whistleblowers are telling us that is the case. So today we're going to have a shopping bag of excuses about points in time and staff being furloughed. In the end, it's the government's responsibility to be able to properly resource our health system, to be able to allow those doctors and nurses to do their job. And when they're coming to us and crying out for us to ask these questions, it shows you that they have given up on the government's solution to fixing it. And how on earth we could possibly have fewer beds in the middle of a health crisis just absolutely defies belief. And we're going to continue to ask these questions. And the question that we repeatedly asked on the floor of Parliament last week, and the Minister's answer tells us that our whistleblowers are on the right track. There have clearly been further deteriorations in the first quarter of this year, and at a time when Queenslanders have never needed a health system more than now, that's troubling for every single person and who works in it and relies on it. Doctors, nurses, AMBOs, allied health staff, they are feeling as tired and as broken as ever. And we repeatedly say to Queenslanders, and as Ros and I have gone around and done those 30 town halls, almost universally Queenslanders always say the care that we're getting inside it is second to none. We see how hard the staff are working. The staff just feel completely broken, and this shows why. When there are less beds, there are less opportunities for a paramedic to offload that patient. There is less opportunities for them to get the treatment they need, and while the paramedic waits at the end of the ramp, at the end of the phone waits a Queenslander who can't get help in their hour of need.
I don't understand how the data work, like data related to the beds. So is it reasonable to have figures fluctuating?
Yeah. Which is why the figure, good question, which is why the figures we've released today are at the end of each quarter. So alarm bells must ring when at the end of the September quarter to the end of the December quarter, 15 months later, there are 335 fewer beds at 29 hospitals. Now, that defies belief. Think about the growth in Queensland, population. Think about the growth in demand for those services. It just defies belief that over such a long period of time there could be so many fewer beds at so many hospitals. But what's more alarming is that the government won't tell us how many there are today. Now, when we ask that question, the Minister will say, well, there's fluctuation. We'll give us what the figure is at the end of March, and then Queenslanders will be able to make their own mind up. Queensland Health is in crisis, and every figure points to it. At 42%, the ambulance ramping data at the end of December, that is the worst in the country. And it's showing. It's showing in those ED wait times. It isn't acceptable that people should wait 24 hours for a bed. It isn't acceptable that they should wait 12 hours in the waiting room. And imagine the frustration of the staff. Imagine being the AMBO that's sitting there wanting to go and help the next Queenslander. Imagine being the doctor and the nurse who just cannot find a bed for someone. And imagine a situation where a government would build a brand new hospital with less services than the last one. This just shows what happens when you have ministers who aren't across their brief and a government that is led by someone who no longer wants to hold those people accountable. And Queenslanders are the collateral damage.
What's your target going to be for ambulance?
Well, the first question I want to ask is, when will ambulance ramping return to the 15% it was that this government inherited? Right now, the second question is, when will ambulance ramping return to the 30% that it was when Anna Bligh described Queensland Health as a basket case? Now, ahead of the next election, Queenslanders will know how many beds we intend to put across the different health networks, but they're also going to know what a return to frontline staff being empowered looks like. They're going to know how soon we will be able to share data in real time. They're going to know what a triaging strategy looks like that is world class and can relieve the pressure on the staff. And they're going to know what it's like to have a government in Queensland that's prepared to take up the fight for 50-50 funding, not change their approach before and after an election. My approach on 50-50 funding is exactly the same today with Mr Albanese as Prime Minister as it was with Mr Morrison as Prime Minister. I'm on Team Queensland. Somehow the Premier and her ministers seem to want to run a protection racket because it's now their mates in Canberra, and Queenslanders are seeing it. So all of those things are going to be very, very clearly defined. And the one thing's for certain, when targets are set, whether or not that's in the health system, whether or not that's social housing, maintenance on roads, delivery on new projects, a budget and a timeline, ministers will be held accountable. That's the way government has to work. It can't always be someone else's fault. Ministers have to administer, and they're not at the moment, across a raft of portfolios, and that has to change. The clerk of the Parliament has. My daughters want me to delete my TikTok. I can promise you that. The clerk of the Parliament has given some advice to MPs. We've all complied with that advice, and I think that's the best way we should handle it. TikTok won't be on my phone as per the advice of the clerk. I will continue to post on TikTok. It's a platform that enables us to speak to a group of Queenslanders who might not otherwise absorb the messages we want to put out about what we want to achieve for Queensland. I do promise that I won't have a dance on TikTok, but the opportunity to use it as a platform to speak to young Queenslanders is something that we're going to continue to do. But I
under the new rules, you know how you can post, so
the advice from the clerk is to not have it on our government phones, and we've all complied with that advice.
are you across the changes to the police disciplinary process?
No.
Story around today?
No, I
sorry
haven't.
about that.
No, I haven't seen that just yet. Happy to, yeah.
Do you have any thoughts about it?
I'll have a look at that and very happy to comment.
Committed Mr Albanese to renewable energy projects, and we have more ambitious targets with
Extremely committed to it, and when targets are set, they're going to be met. And I love the opportunity to talk about environmental targets because the state government haven't hit any that they've set. And emissions in Queensland have increased all but 1 year since the government came to office. And they haven't met a single target when it comes to the reduction in waste. They are so far away from their protected areas target that they've given up talking about it. When the government came to office, their protected areas was somewhere around about 8%. It's barely moved by 0.1% in almost a decade. It defies belief how the government can try to claim the environmental high ground when they have failed on every metric. So we will have ambitious and real and genuine targets and ministers who will be held accountable for it. And I've already spoken about Queenslanders want to see electricity that is three things: affordable, reliable and sustainable. And we're committed to make sure that there is a sensible transition, and we're committed to make sure that the targets we set will be met.
And I had a question from the Sunny Post again about health. Patients have been waiting longer in emergency departments region's really moving.
Yeah.
People are moving. What do you think about those figures?
Well, I'll get Ros to speak specifically to them, but I'll make one comment, and that is the only people who are surprised about the growth in Queensland is the state government. Everyone else has predicted it's occurring, and everybody else realised the pressure that would put on frontline services. But when you have areas that have less beds than before, when you have a government that hasn't resourced the front line that's needed to deal with population growth, that's why you see figures like that. That's why you see hospitals buckling under the strain. And in the case of the Sunny Coast, that region has continued to grow, but it's continued to grow along the lines of what was predicted that would occur. It's a great place to live, and people want to move there. And the only thing that people resent is that the government hasn't delivered the infrastructure, social, environmental and physical, to be able to meet that population growth. And what happens is people fall through the cracks when governments can't plan and deliver properly. Did you want to say that?
A 253% increase at the Sunshine Coast University Hospital is appalling. People were moving to the Sunshine Coast just like they've been moving to the Gold Coast for years. It was the LNP who actually built the Sunshine Coast University Hospital, and under the Labor government there are still beds that haven't even been opened there. So it's no wonder that patients are waiting longer at Sunshine Coast University Hospital, and we need to make sure that we change the culture in Queensland Health so that the staff who are there want to stay there, and that they can attract new staff as well. Thanks.
I have another question about the construction industry.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of trouble at the moment. We're seeing companies go under or likely to come. What does the opposition see as a solution to that?
There's genuine fear in the building industry at the moment from mum and dad investors, from subbies, and the government did make a series of promises around protection for them, and right now Queenslanders who work in it and rely on that industry are still waiting. So I guess the question to the Minister is, what are the plans to give people the protection they need, and above all, what are the plans to fix the building regulator and a board that quite frankly is broken, and Queenslanders have never needed a building regulator more than they do right now. There is genuine fear in the industry at the moment.
A lot of hopeful highliners have been employed at QBCC. They say they're not getting enough help and they weren't given more information, for instance. What should the QBCC do, and what will the LNP do with it if it comes here?
The QBCC, the building regulator needs to be reformed, and the board needs to have people on it who understand the building industry and aren't beholden to the Minister of the day. That's plain and simple. The QBCC is broken, and that building regulator is important. I haven't met a Queenslander who works in the building industry or relies on the building industry who thinks the building regulator does its job properly, aside from the Minister. That board is not accountable to Queenslanders who work in the industry or rely on it, and it has to be fixed. That model is broken, and the Minister hasn't been accountable to fix it. He set a range of targets and promises that haven't been met, and in the next 12 months you're going to have honest people who work in that industry and rely on it who are going to be left on their backside because of the failings of the Minister to properly get that building regulator up to scratch. And I fear that there is genuine pain coming for people at both ends of that industry. Thank you. Thanks all. Ta-ra.
Thank
See
you.
you later.